Welcome to Deep Dive by Abu Yusuf. You know, it's funny, we go through life every single day and time just kind of marches on. But have you ever stopped to think about what time actually is?
It's one of those things that's so fundamental to our existence that we often take it for granted, right?
Yeah, exactly. But today, we're diving headfirst into this very question. It all started with you, our curious listener. You sent in some really interesting material about time and specifically how it relates to, well, stuff happening, the events that make up our reality.
And it gets deep fast. I mean, how do you even begin to define something as slippery as time?
That's our mission on this deep dive. We're going to try to unravel that connection between time and events, see where it leads us, and maybe even just maybe glimpse at what could exist beyond time as we know it.
Buckle up, folks. We'll be pulling ideas from physics, philosophy, and some really mind-bending thought experiments.
Okay, so right off the bat, this question pops up. Can we actually define time by what happens between events?
It's a really intriguing starting point. And as the stuff you sent over highlighted, both physics and philosophy have grappled with this for, well, a long time, no pun intended.
I see what you did there.
In physics, a lot of times, the interval between occurrences, that's how we actually measure time.
Yeah.
Think about it. In classical mechanics, like the physics of motion, you describe movement by how long it takes for something to go from one spot to another.
Right, like timing a race. The time is literally the interval between the starting gun and someone crossing that finish line.
Exactly. Those two events, boom, the start and finish define that chunk of time. But then Einstein enters the scene with his theory of relativity, and our neat little picture gets a whole lot more complex. Time isn't this constant universal thing anymore.
Yeah, things get all wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey.
That's one way to put it. It becomes intertwined with space, this inseparable four-dimensional fabric we call space-time.
Mhm.
And here's the real head-scratcher. The time between two events, it's not actually fixed. It depends on the observer's motion.
Whoa, hold on. You mean like if someone's zooming past, the time it takes for that race to happen, it looks different to them than to us standing still.
Exactly. That's time dilation. One of the bizarre consequences of relativity. It messes with our common sense notion of a shared now.
Yeah.
What you see as simultaneous might not be for someone else moving at a different speed.
Okay, my brain is already starting to hurt a little, but it's fascinating.
It is. Now let's hop over to philosophy, where things get a little less about precise measurement and more about our experience of time. Philosophers like Aristotle, way back in the day, they saw time as intrinsically tied to change. He even defined it as the measure of motion.
So the whole idea of before and after, that sequence of events, that's what makes us experience time.
Yeah, that was his thinking. Without change, without events happening, would there even be time as we understand it? It's a question Aristotle wrestled with. Then you have someone like Immanuel Kant, another philosophical heavyweight, who offered a different perspective. He suggested that time isn't actually out there in the world like a physical thing.
You mean it's not like, oh, there's a box of time over there?
Exactly. Kant said time is more like a fundamental way our minds organize experience. It's a built-in framework, kind of hardwired into our brains, that allows us to perceive a sequence of events, like a mental timeline.
So it's not that time is real in itself, but it's how we make sense of reality.
That was Kant's radical idea. But here's the thing, and the material you sent touched on this. Defining time only by events, it has some limitations. Like, imagine a truly wild scenario. The entire universe just freezes. Every single particle stops moving, all change ceases, no events.
So like a cosmic pause button.
Yeah, exactly. Would time cease to exist in that frozen universe? Or does time have its own independent reality, ticking away even without any events to mark its passage? These are the deep philosophical rabbit holes that open up when you start thinking about time in this way.
I'm already feeling like Alice down the rabbit hole.
Oh,
and it
yeah.
makes you realize to really understand this time-event connection, we got to define both sides of the equation. So what is an event exactly?
It's a great question. And like a lot of things, the definition kind of shifts depending on whether you're talking about physics, everyday life, or even more abstract realms.
So like in physics class versus just chatting about what happened last weekend.
Totally. ChatGPT actually provided a pretty good general definition. An event is a specific, identifiable occurrence or change. But here's the key within a frame of reference. That frame of reference could be the whole universe, or it could be as small as, say, your backyard.
So it's got to be a distinct something happening that we can point to and say, yep, that's an event.
Right. Now, physics takes this idea and gets super precise with it. In physics, an event is a point in space-time. It has spatial coordinates, meaning where it happened in three-dimensional space, length, width, height. But it also has a temporal coordinate, the exact moment in time it occurred.
So it's not just where, but also when, very specifically.
Precisely. Think about a lightning strike. Boom. It happens at a specific longitude, latitude, and altitude, and at a specific second. That's a classic physics event. It's inherently spatial and temporal, all wrapped up in one.
So physics really nails that event down to a precise when and where in the
You
universe.
got it. But in our daily lives, we're a bit more relaxed about what we call an event. It could be anything we perceive as significant, anything that breaks up the flow of our experience.
Hmm.
The phone rings, your dog barks, the sun sets. These are all events in our everyday understanding.
They're the things that stand out that create a before and after in our minds.
Exactly. But for something to really work as a marker that helps us define time, like that interval between events we talked about, there are usually a few conditions. It needs a pretty clear beginning and end. Like, we can point to when it started and when it finished.
Makes sense. You got to be able to say, okay, this is when the music started and this is when it stopped to measure how long the song was.
Right. And the material you shared had some great examples of this in action. Natural cycles, like sunrise to sunset, they define our daylight hours. Two observable events marking a duration.
For work days, too, we clock in, we clock out. Those events tell us how long we've been working.
Exactly. And even in physics experiments, like dropping a ball and measuring how long it takes to hit the ground, we're using events to understand things like gravity. The time interval only makes sense because something changed, the ball went from your hand to the floor, and those start and end states are clear. It really makes you think, without change, without these distinct states, does time even have meaning?
Whoa, yeah. It's like, if nothing's happening, is time even passing? It's almost a philosophical question.
It really is. And it gets even weirder when you start to consider this question you ask.
Yeah.
Can an event occur outside of spatial dimensions? Like, can something happen without having a where?
It's blowing my mind a little bit. How can an event even be an event if it's not happening somewhere?
It's a question that pushes the boundaries of how we normally think about reality. And to explore it, we got to go beyond just physics and dip our toes into metaphysics, even quantum mechanics.
Quantum mechanics. Always a good time for a brain meltdown.
Now, in classical physics, the kind we usually deal with in our everyday lives, the answer is generally no. Events, as we've been talking about, they live in space-time.
Yeah.
So they need a where, a location.
It's hard to picture something happening if there's no space for it to happen in.
Totally.
Yeah.
But when you start thinking about more abstract, metaphysical possibilities, things get a little fuzzier. Could there be an event that's purely temporal, like just a change in time itself without any spatial component? In a hypothetical universe with no space, what would that even look like? Philosophers love to play with these kinds of thought experiments to probe the very nature of time.
So like a change in the now, but no actual location.
Something like that. It's super abstract, but it forces us to really think about what time could be on its own.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around that. But what about like mental events? When we have a sudden thought, an idea pops into our head, those feel like they're happening, but not really in a specific physical place.
That's a great point. Mental events, those flashes of insight, those bursts of creativity, they don't seem as tied to physical space in the same way a lightning strike is.
Yeah.
But even those thoughts, those mental occurrences, they're ultimately linked to activity in our brains, which are, of course, physical things occupying space.
So even our wildest thoughts still have a where inside our heads.
Exactly. But then we venture into the wacky world of quantum mechanics, and things get even weirder. You have phenomena like quantum entanglement, where particles seem to be connected across vast distances instantly, seemingly defying our usual ideas of space and time. And in theories like string theory, which propose extra spatial dimensions beyond the ones we can perceive, the idea of outside of space gets really tricky.
Like our three-dimensional brains just can't quite grasp those higher dimensions.
That's the challenge. And then you also have religious and spiritual traditions that talk about events happening in realms that are totally beyond the physical universe in eternity in spiritual dimensions. Those are operating under completely different rules than our scientific understanding.
So it seems like in our current physics, events need space. But when you start thinking about philosophy, metaphysics, and these more theoretical realms, the possibility of events without a where becomes a real head-scratcher.
Right, it depends on how you define event and existence in the first place. And this leads to a really insightful connection you made. If events in physics need these four dimensions of space-time, Does that mean space and time are connected because we measure time by things happening in space?
Hmm.
Like we see the sun move across the sky, we watch the hands on a clock tick. Those are spatial changes that tell us time is passing.
Yeah, it seemed like a pretty basic link. We see things moving in space, and that's how we track time.
And that observation gets to the heart of what Einstein revolutionized with relativity. You're right, our everyday way of measuring time relies heavily on observing spatial changes. But relativity showed us that space and time are more than just related. They're fundamentally intertwined, like two sides of the same coin. They form that unified entity we call space-time.
So it's not just that space and time are connected, but they're actually different aspects of the same underlying reality.
Exactly. In Einstein's special relativity, he demonstrated that motion through space directly affects the passage of time for the moving observer. That's time dilation. The faster you move relative to someone else, the slower time passes for you. And it works the other way around too. Space itself, distances, they could appear to shrink or stretch depending on relative motion.
It's still so crazy to think that something as fundamental as time isn't absolute for everyone. Like my time and your time could actually be different.
It is mind-blowing, but it's one of the foundational principles of modern physics. And then general relativity takes it even further, showing that gravity, which is caused by mass and energy warping space-time, also affects the flow of time. That's gravitational time dilation. Time runs slower in stronger gravitational fields. So a clock near a massive object will actually tick slower than a clock farther away.
So the very presence of stuff in space actually influences the flow of time.
Precisely. And as you pointed out, all our everyday ways of measuring time, days, years, hours, they're based on observing spatial changes. The Earth spinning, the Earth going around the sun, the gears in a clock turning. These are all spatial events that we use to mark off those temporal intervals. It shows how deeply intertwined these two concepts are.
Okay, so we've got space-time, this four-dimensional fabric where everything happens and space and time are inseparable.
You got it. And it leads to a really profound question about the very beginning of the universe, the Big Bang. If events need these four dimensions, can the Big Bang even be an event, since it wasn't in space or time?
Yeah, it's like if the Big Bang created space and time, how can it also be an event that happened within space and time? It's a paradox.
It's a question that really gets to the limits of our current scientific understanding. You're spot on. Our usual definition of an event assumes that space-time is already there, like the stage is set. But with the Big Bang, we're talking about the creation of the stage itself.
So, like, there was no before the Big Bang in terms of time or space. It's the ultimate origin point.
Exactly. The idea of a before the Big Bang is kind of misleading because time itself, as we know it, began with the Big Bang. Space, time, matter, energy, all of it bursts forth from this incredibly hot, dense state we call the singularity. That's where our current laws of physics basically break down.
It's like asking what's north of the North Pole. The question itself doesn't even make sense in that context.
That's a great analogy. So to call the Big Bang an event, in the same way we talk about events happening in space-time, is kind of tricky. It's more accurate to think of it as the beginning of space-time itself, rather than something that happened within space-time.
And, I mean, our understanding of the universe at that scale, at the very beginning, it's still pretty fuzzy, right?
Absolutely. The material you shared probably mentioned some alternative theories about the Big Bang, like inflationary theory, which suggests there was this super rapid expansion right after the Big Bang, and multiverse theories, where our Big Bang might just be one of many bangs that created different universes, and even quantum cosmology, where they try to describe the beginning of the universe without that initial singularity.
It's all so mind-bogglingly complex, and it really shows how our current knowledge has its limits when we try to grapple with the absolute beginning of everything.
We're pushing the boundaries of what we can know. But let's shift gears a bit. From the universe's beginning to something you brought up. What if we could somehow stop all events from happening? Or maybe even cram every event into a single instant? What would our experience of time be then?
Like hitting the cosmic pause button or fast-forwarding to the end of the tape. Would we even experience time at all?
This is where we get into the deep connection between our perception of time and the constant flow of events. And theoretically, if everything froze, every particle in the universe, every thought and every mind, if there was absolutely no change, then yeah, our experience of time would probably cease. We wouldn't have any way to measure its passage. Before and after would lose all meaning.
Because even our own sense of time, internally, it's based on the events happening within us, right? Our heartbeat, our breathing, our thoughts, those are all events.
Exactly. Our bodies and minds are constantly changing, even at a microscopic level. And that constant flux is part of what creates our experience of time. If all of that suddenly stopped, we'd be in a truly timeless state.
And what about the other scenario? If all events were crammed into a single instant, like everything happening at once?
In that case, it wouldn't be a flow of time anymore. It'd be like a static now encompassing everything that ever was, is, or will be. Our usual understanding of time with the past, present, and future would completely break down.
So it'd be a different kind of timelessness. Not an absence of events, but an overwhelming abundance of them all happening simultaneously.
Exactly. It's a tough concept to visualize,
Yeah.
but it highlights how much our perception of time relies on that sequence of events. And as the material you shared pointed out, there's some interesting analogies to help us think about these ideas.
Analogies are always helpful when you're dealing with stuff this mind-bending.
Totally. Like, imagine a paused universe, everything frozen in place. That captures the idea of all change ceasing. Or think about those moments in deep meditation or flow states where our sense of time seems to disappear. Those are little glimpses of what a timeless state might feel like.
And there's time dilation in your black holes, too. That's a real physical example of how time can be warped, right?
Right. The closer you get to a black hole, the slower time passes for you relative to someone farther away. And then there's the concept of absolute zero in physics, the lowest possible temperature. That's where theoretically all atomic motion stops. It's like the ultimate limit of no events happening.
It's amazing to think that even something like temperature can be connected to the flow of time.
It shows you just how fundamental this concept is. But let's get back to that really intriguing question you posed. If a timeless being exists outside of this flow of events, could they even interact with us temporal creatures? And could both sides be aware of that interaction?
I mean, it's a tough one to wrap your head around. How can something outside of time have any relationship with something that's bound by time?
It's a really deep question, and as ChatGPT pointed out, there are some fundamental challenges. We experience reality as a linear progression of moments, cause and effect, before and after. That's our framework. A timeless being, by definition, wouldn't experience that sequence. So the very notion of interaction, which for us implies a back and forth over time, becomes problematic.
It's like imagine trying to have a conversation with a character in a painting. They exist in a frozen moment, but we're moving through time.
That's a great analogy. But the idea of some kind of mutual awareness, it's not completely ruled out. Though how that awareness would play out is a whole other mystery. The material you sent over had some interesting interpretations. One idea is that a timeless being might perceive all moments in our timeline at once. Past, present, future, it's all just now for them.
So like they see our whole lives laid out in front of them all at the same time.
Exactly. They wouldn't experience the flow, the unfolding. They'd have access to the whole thing. Another possibility is that a timeless being could somehow temporarily manifest within time to interact with us. Like they take on a temporal form for a specific duration.
So they sort of dip their toes into our reality, into our timeline.
Right. Or maybe the interaction itself is kind of fixed from the timeless being's perspective,
Yeah.
and we just experience it as unfolding over time.
So for them, it's already happened, but we're still living through it moment by moment.
That's the idea. And then there's the possibility of understanding interaction in a more metaphorical sense.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's a higher consciousness influencing our reality, but not in a direct back and forth way.
So it's less about a literal conversation and more about a subtle influence or guidance.
That's one way to think about it. The analogy of an author and their story is a helpful one here. The author exists outside the timeline of their book, but they created the characters and the plot. They see the whole arc of the story while the characters are living it out moment by moment.
So the author's kind of timeless in relation to their story, but they still have a profound influence on it.
Exactly. So while the details of interaction between a timeless being and a temporal being are really hard for us to grasp, the possibility of some kind of awareness, some kind of connection, it's not entirely out of the question. Though how it would feel, how it would play out, that remains a mystery.
Okay, so now the big question. If a timeless being can interact with us, would they automatically know our past, present, and future?
That's a natural question, and theoretically the answer seems to be yes. A timeless being existing beyond our linear time would perceive all moments in our timeline simultaneously. And this idea connects with the block universe theory in physics, which basically says all of time, from the Big Bang to the end of the universe, it all exists at once as a single, unchanging block.
So it's like the whole history of the universe is already laid out, and a timeless being can see the entire thing.
That's the concept. Past, present, future, it's all equally real and present to them. They'd have complete awareness of everything that has happened, is happening, and will happen within our timeline.
And if they interacted with us, could they actually share that knowledge? Like, tell us about our own future.
Theoretically, yeah. They wouldn't be bound by our sequential understanding of cause and effect. They can offer insights that seem to come from outside of time, from our perspective. It's a mind-blowing idea, but it bumps up against a big philosophical question. Free will. If someone knows our future, does that mean our choices are already made?
It's the classic debate. If the future's already set, do we really have free will? Or are we just playing out a predetermined script?
Exactly. And the material you sent over touched on this tension. Some philosophical viewpoints suggest that even with knowledge of the future, a timeless being's awareness wouldn't negate our freedom to make choices within our temporal experience. Like, they know what choices we'll make, but we still make them.
It's like that analogy we talked about before. Someone viewing a river from a helicopter can see the whole course of the river, but that doesn't mean they're controlling the flow of the water at each point.
Right. They have a broader perspective, a bigger picture, but that doesn't mean they're dictating every little eddy and current. So maybe a timeless being's knowledge of our timeline wouldn't mean they're controlling our every action.
Okay, so big takeaway. A timeless being interacting with us could, in theory, have knowledge of our whole past, present, and future. But whether that means our future is set in stone, that's a question that goes way beyond physics and into the realm of philosophy and maybe even faith.
Exactly. It's a concept that really pushes us to question some of our most basic assumptions about reality, about choice, about the nature of time itself.
So let's zoom out for a second and bring it back to you, our curious listener. This deep dive into the world of time and events, it shows just how fundamental and yet how utterly mysterious this concept of time is. We started with a simple question: how are time and events related? And we've ended up exploring the Big Bang, timeless beings, free will. It's a testament to how profound your questions are.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. Think about how much our experience of time shapes our perception of reality. Everything we know, everything we do, it happens within this linear flow of moments. But what if we could step outside that flow? What if we could see all of time at once? How would that change our understanding of choice, of consequence, even of who we are?
It's mind-blowing to contemplate. So what does this all mean for us, stuck as we are in our temporal experience?
Maybe it's a reminder that our perspective is limited. We're looking at the universe through the lens of time, and that shapes everything we see. But maybe there are other ways of seeing, other ways of being, and exploring those possibilities, even just through thought experiments, can stretch our minds and help us appreciate the vastness of what we don't know.
And here's a final thought to chew on, something we haven't even touched on directly. If time is so deeply connected to events, could it be that all the activity happening in the universe, from the tiniest quantum fluctuations to the explosions of stars, is actually creating time? Maybe time isn't just the stage where events occur, but a byproduct of all that happening. It's a question that could keep you thinking for a long, long time.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the mysteries of time. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time, keep those questions coming.